How do you fight terror groups? Obviously with increased security, but we talked earlier with an Israeli lawyer, Nitsana Darshan-Leitner, who hits terrorists where it hurts, in their bank accounts.
We came up with this idea to bring lawsuits against terrorism. We started bringing lawsuits against the organizations, state-sponsored terrorism, banks that provide financial services to organizations. And slowly, we got decisions in our favors. We have, today we represent hundreds of terror victims in cases against Iran, Syria, North Korea, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, PLO, and against banks like UBS, American Express Bank, Lebanese Canadian Bank, Central Bank of Iran, Bank of China. And we're holding judgments for more than $1 billion. And we collected, actually got more than $120 million that went to the hands of the terror victims. And in the framework of this work, we are fighting terrorism. We are stopping the money from going to the hands of the terror organizations. We seize the money, we get restraining orders against them. You know, in the end of the day, the terror organizations living in a real world. They need money, they need assets, they need ways to wire their money, and if you block it, you actually block the terrorism.
How does it actually work? I mean, how do you actually stop those terror, the funding of terror organizations?
Well, if you file a lawsuit against a bank, the bank immediately will freeze the account, whether you win the case or not. Like, I can give you an example of Arab banks and European banks and even Chinese banks that used to wire money in the midst of the Intifada to Hamas, Islamic Jihad terror organizations in Gaza. And what we did is filing lawsuits against these banks for aiding and abetting terrorism. You are not allowed to provide financial services or any type of services to a terror organization. You're violating American law and even international law. And as a result of these cases, banks all over the world change the way they're doing businesses, because no bank anymore agrees to open bank accounts to a designated terror organization because they will be sued. Not even that, most of the banks in the Western world check any Islamic charity if it has any contacts with a terror organization. And lastly, banks are very scared to provide financial services in terror zones. So there is no banking system in South Lebanon. There is no banking system in Gaza. This is why you see them smuggling money into Gaza with suitcases, in cash through the tunnels. And that causes them a great deal of harm, because they need to bring hundreds of millions of dollars to operate. You block that, you block their operations. And if banks don't wire money anymore, and if all they can get through the tunnels is very little money, they have a huge problem. And indeed, we were told by the security forces in Israel that as a result of our cases, money diverted to terrorism reduced in 60% in Gaza alone. Hamas in Gaza is like a government. It is a government. They need a ton of money in order to operate, in order to gain the loyalty of the citizens, in order to for the citizens to allow Hamas to shoot missiles towards Israel from their backyard. They need to be loyal, and you buy loyalty with money.
Did all these things change after the second Intifada and after 9/11? Did the banks all of a sudden take notice of what they should or shouldn't do?
The banks realize that they are wiring money only as a result of these lawsuits against them. After 9/11, there was a shockwave in the international banking system, but they weren't aware to the impact that they have on terrorism, on wiring money to terrorism. Only due to the cases against them, you know, only when you get hit in your pocket, then you realize that you might do something wrong. So after 9/11, there were all these rules by the American government: know your customer, right? Try to open a bank account in the United States today, you won't be able to do it so easily. But the most effective, the biggest effect that was on banks is this litigation against them.